Hello and welcome to the channel. Today what we're going to talk about is connecting to Azure Key Vault from a VNet using Azure Logic Apps standard. Let's go. So why is this episode important? So last week I discussed how we can use managed identities to connect from Azure Logic Apps standard to Azure Key Vault using the new built-in connector. So I've got a link to that video in the description if you haven't seen it. Today I want to build upon that specific scenario and restrict which networks can connect to my Azure Key Vault instance itself. So in my case, I want to ensure that only traffic from my VNet that Logic Apps connects to can go ahead and communicate with Key Vault. And so I'll accomplish this by using a private endpoint for my Azure Key Vault instance, and I will drop that private endpoint into the same VNet that my Azure Logic Apps standard instance connects to. So let's go ahead and let's dive deeper into all of this. Now, the first thing that you're going to need to have is a Logic App standard instance that connects to a VNet. And so I'm not going to repeat all of the steps on how to do that because I've got a video here which I will link in the description. But what you do need to be able to do is be able to click on the networking tab, which would be sort of hidden over here, and then go ahead and create a VNet and then connect your Logic App instance to that specific VNet. Because what we're going to do with Key Vault is going to need to line up with this configuration itself. Now, I guess the flip side could also be true, but this is the way in which I've done it. So I've got a VNet set up, I've got my Logic App instance connected to it, and now I can focus on Key Vault. So I would go ahead and create a Key Vault instance, and you can go through the wizard itself. And as we spoke about it last week, we can go ahead and use Azure Role-Based Access Control, and I talked about that in last week's video, so go take a look at that if you're new to this video. But we're going to use that as our permission model itself, which is going to allow us to use very granular controls around how our managed identity can go ahead and access this specific Key Vault with the right role itself. So that's on the Access Policy tab. Then we're going to move over to the Networking tab. Once we're in Networking, we've got a couple options here. And so you can connect this Key Vault directly publicly or via public IP address or service endpoints or a private endpoint itself. And so what I've done here is I'm using private access, which means that only I will be able to access this Key Vault through a VNet itself. So there will not be any public access that is available here. So I'll choose private access, and then I will choose to create a private endpoint. And so here I can go ahead and specify my configuration details, the location, the name of my private endpoint. It's going to be targeting a Key Vault. I'll then be able to select that virtual network. This is the same virtual network that my Logic App was connected to, and then I will connect to the default subnet. Here I'll go ahead and enable private DNS zone, and as a result I'll have a new private DNS zone that is created for me. And after we go through that step, we should see that we do have a private endpoint that's created, and we've got private connectivity enabled as well. Tags I won't go over, then you'll just have the opportunity to review and create, and then you'd have the ability to provision your Key Vault. At this point, you should now have a Key Vault. You should be able to go ahead and click on the left-hand side. Sorry, I got it cut out here. Secrets, then go ahead, generate a secret, and provide your value and any sort of expiration date. And then once we've created that Key Vault, we want to go ahead and go into the IAM, the Access IAM menu that's part of the left navigation, and then go ahead and add a role assignment. And so here we're going to select Manage Identity. We will then be able to go ahead and browse for that managed identity, and this would represent our system managed identity from our Logic App standard instance. Once again, if this is unfamiliar to you, go ahead and check out last week's video, which will be linked in the description, where I talk all about this. Then when we go ahead and create a new connection, we'll need to be able to go ahead and do so using managed identity, and we'll use the vault URI, which will come from our key vault. On the overview section, we'll be able to grab that value and paste it in there. Now, one thing to be aware of is that when you're doing this configuration, remember that we had disabled public access. So you need to be on the same network in order to provide these steps, because once again, the traffic is going to flow from that specific VNet itself. So something to be aware of. Otherwise, what you can do is set it up using, like if you just want to see how this works, go ahead and set it up using public access, create your key vault, then go ahead, create your keys, and you can also basically impose those network restrictions after the fact. And so that's one way you can work around it, is if you're trying to do, you've got a virtual network in Azure, you're just working on, say, your own local laptop on your own home network, then you can sort of use that approach instead. But if you're in a corporate environment, then you should already be part of that VNet if you've got VNet peering between Azure and your local network. Okay, so let's just jump into a demo, and I'll show you a little bit more about how this all works. All right, so I'm in Azure, I've got my key vault, and as mentioned before, I've got my secrets that have been created. And once again, this just goes to show you how the public network access is disabled, so I can't actually show it to you. But if I was on that network, I would be able to go ahead and see these. Alternatively, if I go back, and this is exactly what I was discussing before, if I go in and basically enable this, then I would be able to go ahead and see it. I don't want to do that now because I don't want to invalidate any tests, but we have my public access is disabled, and then I do have a private endpoint that has been enabled. And so that's what's going to allow my Logic app to go ahead and connect to this specific secret itself. So let's go ahead and just do kind of the positive test. So this is a Logic app that is part of that Logic app standard instance. So it's connected to the same VNet. I'll have the ability to go ahead and to get a secret. In this case, it'll be my secret key. I can go ahead, I can run this. Let's go ahead, let's run. We can see that it was successful and that we were able to go ahead and retrieve our key. Once again, I've talked about this before. Go ahead and use secure inputs, outputs to protect your values. That was in the other video as well. All right, so the negative test is I've got a consumption Logic app. And so this consumption Logic app is not connected to that VNet. So it would be using this would be the Azure connector of Key Vault versus the other one using the built-in. I should have mentioned that, that's quite important. So here we're going to try to go ahead and connect to the same vault, but we're doing so essentially through the public internet, not through a VNet. And so this should fail because we can't actually connect to that private endpoint because it's within our VNet. And as a result, see now it's going through its retries. And as a result, we're protected from the outside itself. So that will go ahead, that will retry a few times, and then ultimately we will fail. There it is. It'll fail itself. And then because I kind of skipped over this, I do want to make sure people understand that when I'm going to go ahead and to connect to Key Vault using a VNet, I need to use the built-in connector. I shouldn't be using the Azure or the managed connector because that will go through public internet. So in the VNet scenarios, I want to be in built-in. I want to use this connector. I don't want to be in Azure and be using this connector there. All right, so that concludes a demo for this week. Once again, wanted to follow up on last week's video to talk about, using managed identity, but then also using the private endpoint support and VNET support in Logic Apps and Azure Key Vault itself, so that you've got essentially a bubble over your secrets, your vault, and can just avoid any potential sort of issues with people being able to access over the public internet. So that concludes this video. Look for another video next week, and thanks for checking out this video. Later.